would enjoy this. You ever see a face turn this color before? Huh? I'm gonna tear you apart.
Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Flight Risk 2025 emerges as one of the most gripping and atmospheric action thrillers of the year. A film that successfully blends psychological tension, survival drama, and human deception into a single cinematic experience. Directed by Mel Gibson, the movie marks his much-awaited return to intense character-driven storytelling. Starring Mark Wahlberg and Michelle Dockery in commanding roles, Flight Risk takes audiences on a chilling journey above the rugged landscapes of Alaska, where every moment in the sky holds the weight of life and death. From its very first scene, the movie establishes a mood of isolation, danger, and uncertainty, gripping the viewer in a web of suspicion that only grows tighter as the story unfolds. The film doesn't rely on flashy special effects or massive explosions. Instead, it focuses on raw human tension, claustrophobic settings, and the slow unraveling of truth, making it a standout among modern action thrillers. At its core, Flight Risk tells the story of a pilot tasked with transporting a fugitive and a U.S. Marshal across a dangerous Alaskan route. What begins as a routine flight quickly spirals into chaos as secrets are revealed, alliances are tested, and survival becomes the ultimate goal. The movie's brilliance lies not just in its plot but in the way it handles its themes of trust, betrayal, and moral conflict. It reminds viewers that danger doesn't always come from the outside world. It can come from the person sitting right next to you. The confined setting of the aircraft becomes a pressure cooker for human emotion, forcing the characters to confront not only the external storm, but also the psychological turbulence within themselves. Mel Gibson, known for his intense direction in films like Apocalypto and Hacksaw Ridge, brings the same cinematic sharpness and emotional depth to this smaller, more contained thriller. Every frame feels deliberate, every silence feels loaded with meaning, and every line of dialogue carries hidden weight. From a storytelling perspective, Flight Risk is built on suspense that gradually escalates rather than exploding all at once. Gibson's direction ensures that tension builds naturally through character interaction and environmental danger. The audience is placed right inside the cockpit, feeling every vibration of the plane, every flicker of fear in the character's eyes. Mark Wahlberg delivers a performance that is both restrained and intense, portraying a man who appears composed but hides deep emotional scars and questionable motives. Michelle Dockery's character adds a strong counterbalance, bringing intelligence, empathy, and subtle ferocity to her role. Their dynamic becomes the emotional and psychological backbone of the movie, turning what could have been a straightforward thriller into a layered study of human survival under extreme pressure. Visually, the film captures Alaska not as a scenic paradise but as an endless, merciless expanse, beautiful yet deadly. The cinematography emphasizes the isolation of the characters. Wide aerial shots of the mountains contrast sharply with the tight, suffocating interiors of the small aircraft. This visual juxtaposition heightens the sense of confinement and helplessness that defines the story. The harsh weather, the turbulent skies, and the constant threat of mechanical failure serve as metaphors for the instability of the human relationships inside the plane. In many ways, the environment becomes a character in itself, unpredictable, hostile, and unrelenting. The audience never feels safe, just as the characters never truly do. The screenplay, co-written by Gibson and other collaborators, maintains a fine balance between realism and stylized tension. Dialogue is sparse yet meaningful, giving more power to silence and expression. The pacing is meticulous, with every scene contributing to the slow buildup of anxiety. There's an old-school feel to the narrative structure. It recalls the minimalist thrillers of the 1970s and 1980s, where storytelling relied more on atmosphere and psychology than on action spectacle. However, when the action does arrive, it hits with brutal realism. Crashes, chases, and confrontations are grounded in the physicality of the world. Nothing feels exaggerated or computer-generated. Gibson's insistence on authenticity gives the movie a tactile texture. It feels gritty, cold, and dangerously real. One of the most fascinating aspects of Flight Risk is how it plays with audience perception. From the very beginning, viewers are encouraged to question what they see and hear. The line between hero and villain blurs as motivations are slowly revealed. The fugitive may not be entirely guilty. The marshal may not be entirely righteous, and the pilot may have reasons of his own. This moral ambiguity keeps the audience guessing until the very end. It's a psychological chess game disguised as an action thriller, and that's what makes it stand out. Gibson uses misdirection like a magician, keeping us focused on one hand while the real trick unfolds in the other. When the final twist arrives, it doesn't feel forced, it feels inevitable, the natural conclusion of all the clues we missed along the way. Musically, the score by Rupert Gregson-Williams complements the film's tone perfectly. The music doesn't overwhelm the scenes but lingers subtly beneath them, amplifying tension when needed and disappearing entirely during the most intense moments. The use of silence, in particular, becomes a powerful tool. In one unforgettable sequence, the hum of the plane engine and the faint whistle of wind replace the score entirely, creating an almost unbearable sense of immersion. The sound design overall is extraordinary. It places the audience right inside the aircraft, hearing every creak of metal, every shift of air pressure, every breath of uncertainty. This auditory realism makes the film's world feel immediate and tangible. From a thematic standpoint, Flight Risk explores fear, not just the fear of death, but the fear of truth. Each character carries a secret, and the confined setting forces those secrets to emerge. The movie asks uncomfortable questions about what people are capable of when pushed to their limits. How far will someone go to protect their life, their freedom, or their conscience? In that sense, it's not just an action movie, it's a morality play set in the sky. Viewers are left to decide who, if anyone, truly deserves survival. This complexity elevates the film beyond its genre peers, giving it the kind of emotional resonance that lingers long after the credits roll. In terms of production, Flight Risk demonstrates Mel Gibson's mastery of atmosphere and pacing. The minimal set design, a small aircraft, a few key props, and the endless sky, forces the narrative to depend entirely on performance and direction. Every camera movement has purpose. Every cut intensifies emotion. The editing by David Rosenthal is sharp and rhythmic, alternating between calm and chaos to mirror the emotional roller coaster of the characters. The practical effects used for the flight turbulence, weather storms, and crash sequences add to the realism. Gibson's commitment to shooting on location in remote parts of Alaska adds another layer of authenticity. The cold, harsh conditions seep into every frame, visually communicating the danger without the need for dialogue. What makes Flight Risk especially relevant in today's cinematic landscape is its focus on simplicity. In an era dominated by overblown CGI blockbusters, this movie reminds audiences that real suspense doesn't come from visual spectacle. It comes from storytelling, performance, and direction. The claustrophobic setting becomes a metaphor for the human condition. We're all trapped in circumstances we can't fully control, forced to confront our choices and their consequences. That existential undercurrent gives flight risk surprising philosophical weight. It's an action film that thinks deeply, a thriller that feels personal, and a survival story that hits emotionally. Critics have noted that Flight Risk feels like a throwback to the kind of high-concept thrillers that defined the late 1990s and early 2000s films like Air Force One or The Fugitive, but stripped of political theatrics and infused with modern psychological realism. The result is both nostalgic and fresh, appealing to audiences who crave intelligent tension. Mark Wahlberg, often typecast in action roles, delivers one of his more layered performances here, balancing stoicism with vulnerability. Michelle Dockery's nuanced portrayal of the U.S. Marshal gives the story its emotional grounding. Together, they create a believable, volatile dynamic that anchors the entire narrative. By the time the film reaches its climax, Flight Risk has transformed from a simple transport mission into a symbolic battle between truth and survival. The journey through the storm mirrors the internal storms raging within each character. The conclusion, without spoiling specifics, delivers both closure and lingering ambiguity, a hallmark of Gibson's storytelling style. Viewers walk away not just entertained but thoughtful, replaying scenes in their minds to catch the details they may have missed. Ultimately, Flight Risk 2025 stands as a testament to the enduring power of stripped-down, character-focused filmmaking. It proves that a story set in one of the smallest imaginable locations, a cockpit, can still explore some of the largest themes: morality, trust, and redemption. The film's slow-burning suspense, haunting visuals, and moral complexity make it one of the most intriguing entries in the 2025 action thriller lineup. For audiences hungry for something more intelligent than the usual action fare, Flight Risk delivers a breath of cold Alaskan air, crisp, unforgiving, and unforgettable. Unforgiving and unforgettable. The storyline of Flight Risk 2025 is a masterclass in minimalist yet emotionally charged storytelling. It begins with a premise so simple that it feels almost familiar. A small charter plane carrying a U.S. Marshal, a dangerous fugitive, and a pilot across the treacherous skies of Alaska. But as the narrative unfolds, that simplicity transforms into a complex web of deceit, survival, and moral ambiguity. The movie wastes no time setting its tone, cold, tense, and quietly foreboding. The audience is immediately immersed in the vast, snow-covered expanse of the Alaskan wilderness, where isolation is not just a backdrop, but a force of nature that dictates the fate of everyone involved. From the first frame, Mel Gibson establishes an atmosphere of danger and distrust. The environment feels alive, almost sentient, a silent predator waiting to consume the characters trapped within it. The film opens with Mark Wahlberg's character, a seemingly ordinary bush pilot named Darrell Booth, preparing for a routine transport mission. The scene is quiet but loaded with unease. His plane sits on a desolate airstrip surrounded by snow and silence. The sound of the wind howling through the hangar foreshadows the chaos to come. He's soon introduced to his passengers, a stoic U.S. Marshal played by Michelle Dockery, and a handcuffed fugitive accused of violent crimes. Their mission: to fly from a remote Alaskan outpost to Anchorage for a court appearance. At first glance, everything appears straightforward, but subtle hints in the dialogue and body language suggest otherwise. The fugitive seems too calm, too composed. The marshal is cautious but not entirely confident. And the pilot, though polite and professional, carries a quiet intensity that suggests something deeper is going on. As the plane takes off, the first act of the film relies heavily on tension built through silence. The confined space of the cockpit becomes the central stage for character development. Every glance, every small movement, every shift in tone builds an invisible pressure that keeps the audience on edge. Gibson uses the limited environment brilliantly. There's no escape, no distraction, just three people in the endless Alaskan sky. The cold, muted colors of the cinematography enhance the sense of claustrophobia, and the constant hum of the aircraft becomes a kind of heartbeat for the film. Within minutes, the viewer begins to realize that not everything is as it seems. Soon, the first cracks begin to show in the characters' facades. The fugitive, portrayed with unnerving calm by Topher Grace in some versions of reports, begins to speak cryptically, suggesting he knows more about the pilot than the marshal realizes. He implies that Darrell Booth might not be who he claims to be. The tension escalates when a storm hits unexpectedly, forcing the plane to change course. As visibility drops and turbulence increases, the marshal's trust in the pilot begins to waver. Questions start to arise. Who really arranged this flight? Why does the pilot seem so composed under pressure? And what if the real danger isn't the fugitive but the man flying the plane? The middle portion of Flight Risk is where the psychological game intensifies. As the plane navigates through worsening weather, the character's emotional stability begins to deteriorate. Flashbacks and fragmented conversations slowly reveal pieces of their backstories. The fugitive claims he's being framed for a crime he didn't commit. The marshal insists she's following orders but seems conflicted about the case. Meanwhile, the pilot's composed demeanor starts to crack as he reveals fragments of personal loss, a past tragedy that may or may not be connected to the mission. Each revelation shifts the audience's perception of who the real villain is. Gibson masterfully manipulates these shifting loyalties, ensuring that no one can be trusted fully, not even the person you're rooting for. When the storm reaches its peak, the film delivers one of its most visually stunning and emotionally intense sequences. The plane, tossed violently by wind and ice, feels like it could tear apart at any moment. The camera stays close to the characters, emphasizing their panic and helplessness. In the chaos, a mechanical failure forces them to attempt an emergency landing in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness. The crash sequence is raw, realistic, and horrifying, not because of massive explosions but because of its visceral authenticity. Metal groans, ice shatters, and silence follows. When the wreckage finally stops moving, the once contained story suddenly expands into the vast, merciless landscape of Alaska. Now stranded in freezing conditions with limited supplies, the three survivors face a new kind of danger. Survival becomes their immediate concern, but the psychological warfare continues. The fugitive tries to persuade the marshal that the pilot has ulterior motives, while the pilot claims the fugitive is manipulating her. The wilderness amplifies their distrust. Every decision becomes a matter of life and death. The snow-covered world around them is both breathtaking and lethal, a mirror of the tension within their group. The environment itself becomes a test of morality. To survive, they must cooperate, but cooperation demands trust, and trust has already been shattered. As the days pass, secrets unravel like loose threads. A shocking revelation occurs when the marshal finds documents hidden in the plane wreckage, suggesting that the pilot had prior knowledge of the fugitive's transport. This twist changes everything. It becomes clear that the mission wasn't random. It was a setup. The fugitive's transport was orchestrated for reasons far more personal than official duty. Darrell Booth, the pilot, is not just a neutral party. He's connected to the fugitive's past, possibly seeking revenge or redemption. The ambiguity of his motives keeps the story unpredictable. Is he a vigilante trying to bring justice or a broken man blinded by vengeance? The film's pacing through this middle act is slow but deliberate. The screenplay doesn't rush the revelations. It lets them breathe, allowing the tension to build naturally. Each confrontation between the characters feels like a chess move, strategic, emotional, and dangerous. Mel Gibson's direction ensures that even the quiet moments carry immense weight. A simple exchange of looks across a campfire becomes as thrilling as a gunfight. The isolation of the setting emphasizes their psychological deterioration. The wilderness strips away all pretense, reducing them to raw human instincts. Hunger, cold, and fear erode their facades until only truth remains. And the truth, as it turns out, is far darker than anyone imagined. The final act begins when a rescue team's radio signal is detected, reigniting hope. However, that hope quickly turns to paranoia. The fugitive warns that if they're found, the truth about their mission will never see the light of day. He claims powerful people want him dead, and that's why they arranged this secret transport. The marshal faces an impossible choice: trust the system she serves or trust the two men who have lied to her in different ways. As the rescue approaches, tensions explode into violence. A gunfight erupts not out of malice but out of desperation. The blizzard around them rages, echoing their inner chaos. In the climactic moments, the film finally answers its central question: who can truly be trusted when survival is at stake? Without revealing the exact ending, it's safe to say that the resolution is both tragic and cathartic. The film concludes not with triumph, but with quiet devastation. One character makes the ultimate sacrifice, ensuring the truth survives even if they do not. The closing shots of the movie return to the vast Alaskan sky, now calm after the storm. The plane's wreckage lies buried beneath the snow, a haunting reminder of the fragile line between justice and vengeance, truth and deception. What makes the storyline so effective is its dual nature. On the surface, it's a straightforward survival thriller about a crash in the wilderness. Beneath that, it's a meditation on identity, trust, and moral conflict. Each character represents a different facet of human nature. The pilot embodies guilt and redemption, the marshal stands for law and moral duty, and the fugitive symbolizes truth obscured by power. Their interactions become allegories for larger questions about justice and humanity. The wilderness, indifferent and infinite, acts as a silent judge, watching their struggle without compassion. Throughout the narrative, Gibson uses nature as both a metaphor and an antagonist. The snowstorms, avalanches, and blizzards symbolize the uncontrollable forces that shape human fate. The physical journey through the Alaskan wilderness parallels the character's emotional journey toward revelation. By the end, they are stripped of all illusions, left with nothing but truth, pain, and survival. It's this thematic layering that elevates flight risk beyond mere entertainment. The story becomes a study of how far people will go to find redemption, how deeply they can deceive themselves, and how easily truth can vanish in the storm. In essence, Flight Risk 2025 is a journey not just through Alaska's frozen terrain, but through the darkest corners of the human soul. It's about how isolation magnifies guilt, how danger exposes hidden motives, and how survival often demands the surrender of morality. The film's storyline succeeds because it refuses to give easy answers. It lets the audience wrestle with uncertainty, forcing them to feel the cold, the fear, and the moral weight of every decision. By the time the end credits roll, the audience is left not with relief but with reflection, a lingering sense that beneath the snow and silence, the real storm was always inside. Storm was always inside. At the heart of Flight Risk 2025 lies its trio of complex and morally ambiguous characters, each one carrying secrets that slowly unravel as the story unfolds. Unlike traditional action movies where the lines between hero and villain are clearly drawn, this film thrives on uncertainty. Every character hides a motive, a past wound, or a hidden agenda that complicates their relationships and drives the story forward. The claustrophobic setting of the airplane and the hostile Alaskan wilderness become psychological battlefields where truth, deception, and survival intertwine. Director Mel Gibson crafts each of these roles with surgical precision, ensuring that even their smallest gestures and glances speak volumes. The result is a character study disguised as an action thriller, an exploration of guilt, redemption, and the fragile boundaries between justice and vengeance. The story begins with Daryl Booth, Mark Wahlberg, the pilot whose calm demeanor conceals a deep emotional turmoil. On the surface, Daryl appears to be a professional doing his job, flying clients across Alaska's frozen expanse with skill and composure. But as the narrative progresses, it becomes clear that he's not just a pilot, he's a man haunted by his past. Hints of tragedy are sprinkled throughout the dialogue. A brief glance at an old photograph in his cockpit, a quiet hesitation before mentioning his family, and the way he looks away when the fugitive mentions loss, slowly. The audience learns that Daryl once had a wife and child who died under mysterious circumstances, possibly related to the same criminal network connected to his current passengers. This backstory transforms Daryl from a mere bystander into a morally conflicted figure seeking redemption, or perhaps revenge. His decision to take the flight isn't as random as it seems. It's motivated by personal reasons, by an unspoken need to confront his own demons. Every choice he makes carries a double meaning. Is he trying to save lives or settle old scores? Wahlberg's performance captures this inner conflict perfectly. He portrays Daryl as a man who's outwardly composed but internally fractured. His eyes reveal guilt, his silence hides pain, and his actions oscillate between compassion and cold calculation. He's both protagonist and anti-hero, an embodiment of how grief and vengeance can coexist within the same heart. Opposite him stands U.S. Marshal Madeline "Maddie" Reed, Michelle Dockery, the embodiment of authority and moral duty. At first glance, Maddie is everything Daryl isn't. Disciplined, rational, and bound by the rule of law. She's introduced as a determined officer, tasked with escorting a dangerous fugitive to trial. Her confidence and composure give the impression of someone who trusts procedure and believes in justice. Yet as the story unfolds, we see cracks in her armor. She's not as certain as she appears. Her eyes betray moments of doubt, especially when faced with moral dilemmas that blur the lines between right and wrong. Maddie's hidden motive is more psychological than personal. She's driven by the need to prove herself, to maintain control in an uncontrollable situation. Throughout the film, she's tested repeatedly, not just by the physical challenges of survival, but by the ethical challenges of trust. The fugitive's words shake her faith in the system she serves. When he begins revealing details that suggest government corruption and wrongful imprisonment, Maddie finds herself questioning her orders. Is she truly protecting justice, or is she unknowingly part of a larger cover-up? This internal struggle becomes one of the film's emotional anchors. Dockery portrays Maddie's transformation with remarkable subtlety. Her authoritative posture slowly gives way to vulnerability. Her assertive tone softens into uncertainty. She's caught between the law she upholds and the truth that confronts her, forcing her to make choices that defy her own principles. Then comes the enigmatic third figure, the fugitive. Daniel Cain, played by Topher Grace, a man whose charm and intelligence mask a deeply ambiguous morality. From the moment he appears on screen, handcuffed yet calm, the audience senses that there's more to him than his criminal record suggests. He speaks with measured confidence, dropping cryptic comments that unsettle both the pilot and the marshal. Initially presented as a murderer being transported for trial, Daniel slowly begins to undermine that narrative. He claims he's a whistleblower, framed by powerful figures within the justice system who want him silenced. His knowledge of Daryl's past and his unsettling familiarity with the crash's circumstances suggest that he knows far more than he should. Daniel's motive evolves with every act of the film. At first, he seems focused on escape, but as the story progresses, it becomes clear that his goal isn't simply freedom, it's exposure. He wants the truth to come out no matter the cost. His interactions with Maddie are particularly fascinating. He manipulates her skepticism, appealing to her sense of justice while sowing seeds of doubt about Daryl. Yet his sincerity remains questionable. Is he telling the truth, or is he an expert manipulator exploiting their vulnerabilities to save himself? The genius of Gibson's direction lies in how he never gives the audience a definitive answer. Daniel remains a mirror, reflecting the fears and insecurities of those around him. The interplay between these three characters is the film's heartbeat. Each one represents a moral archetype distorted by trauma and circumstance. Daryl embodies guilt and the search for redemption. Maddie symbolizes faith in order and justice. Daniel represents truth twisted by corruption. Together they form a triangle of conflicting philosophies. Their conversations often feel like philosophical debates disguised as tense exchanges. In one particularly intense scene, Daniel accuses Maddie of being a servant of lies, claiming that the justice system uses people like her to bury inconvenient truths. Daryl intervenes, telling him that justice and truth are not the same thing, that sometimes survival demands compromise. The dialogue cuts deep, revealing each character's belief system in sharp contrast. The beauty of the writing lies in how their hidden motives slowly intertwine. As new revelations surface, alliances shift constantly. At one point, Maddie trusts Daryl implicitly, until she discovers that he volunteered for the flight. Later, she finds herself reluctantly relying on Daniel when Daryl's behavior grows erratic. This constant realignment of loyalties keeps the tension alive. No one remains purely good or evil. Everyone exists in shades of gray. By the midpoint of the film, the audience realizes that truth itself has become the rarest commodity. Gibson's direction ensures that the actors convey these motives through expression rather than exposition. The way Daryl grips the yoke of the plane too tightly during calm weather, the way Maddie hesitates before cuffing the fugitive, or the way Daniel smirks just before revealing a new piece of information. All these details serve as emotional breadcrumbs for the viewer. Even when no words are spoken, their internal struggles are palpable. The confined setting amplifies these unspoken emotions. There's nowhere to run, no space to hide. Every lie, every truth, every flicker of doubt is exposed under the harsh light of survival. What makes these characters so memorable is their transformation. Daryl, who begins as a man seeking quiet redemption, becomes someone capable of morally gray decisions. By the end, he's forced to confront the consequences of his vengeance, realizing that justice built on pain is hollow. Maddie evolves from a rigid law enforcer into a human being capable of empathy and moral flexibility. Her faith in the system crumbles, but from its ruins emerges a truer understanding of what justice means. Daniel, meanwhile, remains the most unpredictable. He oscillates between villain and victim, His intelligence both his weapon and his curse. Even in his final moments, the audience can't fully decide whether to pity him or condemn him. Their relationships evolve with remarkable realism. Daryl and Maddie's initial professional respect turns into mutual suspicion, then reluctant cooperation, and finally into a fragile bond forged in adversity. Daniel's presence acts as a catalyst for their transformation. He exposes the truth about both of them, forcing them to face who they really are. In one chilling scene near the end, as the storm rages around them, Daniel tells Daryl, "You're not flying away from your sins, you're flying straight into them." That single line encapsulates the essence of flight risk. The idea that no matter how far we run, our past always finds us. The hidden motives of these characters are also mirrored by the environment itself. Alaska's wilderness serves as a metaphor for their inner worlds, vast, cold, and filled with hidden dangers. Just as the snow conceals treacherous ice beneath its surface, each character hides truths beneath a facade of composure. The setting strips them of their illusions, forcing them to reveal their authentic selves. The wilderness doesn't care about justice or morality. It only tests strength and willpower. In this brutal landscape, the true nature of each person emerges. The film's emotional power comes from the slow revelation of these motives, rather than from action sequences. Every new piece of information redefines the viewer's understanding of the story. When Maddie learns about Daryl's connection to the fugitive's past, her moral compass shatters. When Daryl realizes the extent of Daniel's deception, he's forced to confront his own hypocrisy. Each character's journey becomes a reflection of human fallibility, the way pain can corrupt ideals and how the search for truth can destroy those who pursue it too deeply. Mark Wahlberg's portrayal of Daryl Booth in Flight Risk 2025 stands as one of the most compelling performances of his career. An embodiment of quiet rage, haunted morality, and emotional restraint that slowly unravels over the film's 91-minute runtime. Wahlberg has played action heroes before, but Daryl Booth is different. He isn't a man of bravado or swagger. He's a man suffocating under the weight of guilt and memory. His power doesn't come from physicality or bravado. It comes from silence, from the subtleties of pain written across his face. Under Mel Gibson's direction, Wahlberg delivers a career-defining performance that strips away his typical tough guy image and replaces it with something far more human. Vulnerability disguised as composure. From his very first appearance, Wahlberg commands the screen without saying a word. The opening sequence, showing Daryl performing routine pre-flight checks in the cold Alaskan air, establishes him as a man of discipline and solitude. His movements are methodical, but there's an almost imperceptible heaviness in them. A pause before tightening a strap, a deep exhale before starting the engine. Gibson lingers on Wahlberg's expressions, using close-ups to highlight the lines on his face, the unspoken exhaustion in his eyes. The audience immediately senses that this isn't just another flight. It's a burden he's carrying. Wahlberg's ability to project that emotional weight without dialogue is the hallmark of a seasoned actor in full control of his craft. One of the most striking aspects of Wahlberg's performance is how he uses silence as storytelling. In a movie where tension depends heavily on confined space and limited dialogue, his quiet intensity becomes the emotional engine of the film. Every silence feels loaded with meaning, moments where the audience can almost hear his thoughts churning beneath the calm surface. Whether he's staring through the cockpit window into the endless white of the Alaskan wilderness or glancing nervously at his passengers, his stillness speaks volumes. It's as if every second of silence is a confession he can't bring himself to voice. Gibson frames these scenes with deliberate pacing, allowing Wahlberg's expressions to tell stories that words never could. The brilliance of his performance lies in its duality. On one hand, Daryl is a competent, controlled professional, a pilot who seems fully in charge of his surroundings. On the other hand, he's a man on the verge of collapse. Wahlberg masterfully balances these opposing states of mind. His composure is never entirely convincing. There's always a subtle tremor, a flicker of unease beneath the surface. When the fugitive begins taunting him about his past, that mask begins to crack. Wahlberg doesn't explode immediately. He allows the tension to build slowly, letting the audience feel the internal war between rage and restraint. This gradual unraveling transforms Daryl from a functional protagonist into a deeply tragic figure. It's also important to note how Wahlberg's physical performance contributes to the film's authenticity. The entire story takes place within the tight confines of a small aircraft and the hostile Alaskan terrain after an emergency landing. There's little room for movement, yet Wahlberg turns that confinement into an advantage. The way he grips the yoke, his shoulders tightening with every turbulence jolt, mirrors his psychological tension. Even his breathing patterns become a storytelling tool. Calm during the flight's early moments, but increasingly erratic as the situation deteriorates. Every physical detail, his posture, his gestures, his fatigue, adds layers to the character. You can almost feel the frostbite in his hands and the weight of regret pressing down on his chest. Another strength of Wahlberg's portrayal is his emotional control. Many action actors rely on explosive emotion to communicate intensity, but Wahlberg goes in the opposite direction here. He lets the audience do the emotional work. When Daryl recalls fragments of his past, his lost family, the mistakes that led to their deaths, Wahlberg doesn't deliver a teary monologue. Instead, he lets those emotions flicker through micro-expressions. The way his eyes darken, his jaw tightens, or his lips quiver before he forces himself back into control. It's subtle acting at its finest, reminiscent of old-school performances from the likes of Gene Hackman or Clint Eastwood. Men who said more through silence than through speeches, a pivotal moment that encapsulates. Wahlberg's brilliance comes midway through the film, during a confrontation between Daryl and Daniel Cain, Topher Grace. The fugitive begins revealing details about Daryl's past, hinting that he might have been indirectly responsible for his family's death. Instead of responding with anger, Daryl sits quietly, his eyes fixed forward, his hands trembling slightly on the controls. The camera stays close to Wahlberg's face as he fights to keep his composure, and in that moment, the audience feels the full magnitude of his torment. It's not just acting, it's transformation. Wahlberg disappears, and what remains is a broken man trapped in his own silence. Another aspect worth noting is how Wahlberg interacts with Michelle Dockery's character, Maddie Reed. Their chemistry is unique, not romantic, but deeply psychological. Maddie represents order and moral clarity, while Daryl embodies chaos and guilt. Throughout the film, their dynamic shifts from mutual respect to suspicion to reluctant partnership. Wahlberg's performance adapts seamlessly to these transitions. When Maddie asserts authority, he responds with quiet defiance. When she begins to doubt the fugitive, his empathy surfaces subtly through tone and body language. Their conversations often carry multiple meanings, each word, each pause charged with unspoken understanding. Wahlberg's ability to maintain that emotional tension without overacting gives their relationship a raw, believable edge. His collaboration with Mel Gibson also deserves recognition. Gibson's direction emphasizes realism and psychological depth, and Wahlberg fully commits to that vision. Gibson's films have always explored flawed, tortured men, characters seeking redemption through suffering, and Daryl Booth fits that archetype perfectly. Wahlberg channels that energy with precision. There's a distinctly Gibsonian intensity to his performance, raw, unapologetic, and deeply human. You can see echoes of Gibson's earlier protagonists, men like William Wallace or Tom Mullen, in Wahlberg's portrayal. But where Gibson's characters were often fiery and outwardly defiant, Daryl's defiance is internalized. He's not screaming into battle. He's screaming into silence. What's particularly impressive about Wahlberg's performance is how it anchors the film's entire tone. Flight Risk could have easily turned into a conventional survival thriller, but Wahlberg elevates it into a character-driven study of guilt and redemption. His presence grounds the film emotionally. Even during high-intensity moments like the plane crash sequence or the brutal confrontation in the snow, Wahlberg never loses that inner stillness that defines Daryl. The chaos around him contrasts sharply with his stoic focus, amplifying the film's tension. In many ways, Daryl becomes a metaphor for the human condition, calm on the outside, crumbling within. Critics have noted that Wahlberg's role in Flight Risk marks a significant evolution in his career. For years, he's been associated with action-heavy roles that rely more on charisma and brawn than on nuance. Here he proves that subtlety can be just as powerful. His performance aligns more with psychological thrillers like Prisoners or Wind River than with traditional action fare. It's a mature, stripped-down version of Wahlberg, less concerned with spectacle, more invested in emotional authenticity. He embodies the idea that true strength lies in vulnerability. That courage isn't about invincibility, but about facing one's own demons. The film's climax showcases the culmination of Wahlberg's emotional arc. When Daryl finally confesses the truth about his past to Maddie, Wahlberg delivers the scene with heartbreaking restraint. There are no dramatic tears or overblown declarations, just a quiet, trembling admission that he's been running from himself. His voice cracks only slightly as he speaks, his eyes fixed downward as if ashamed to meet hers. It's a deeply human moment that resonates long after the credits roll. That's the power of Wahlberg's performance. It lingers. It makes the audience reflect not just on his character's journey, but on their own capacity for forgiveness and self-redemption. Equally remarkable is how Wahlberg handles the moral ambiguity of his role. Daryl isn't purely good or bad, he's both. Wahlberg doesn't shy away from portraying the darker sides of his character. When Daryl makes morally questionable choices, like withholding vital information or manipulating the situation to his advantage, Wahlberg plays those moments with chilling realism. He doesn't justify Daryl's actions, he simply inhabits them. That refusal to moralize his character makes him more believable. Viewers may not always agree with his choices, but they understand them. That's what great acting does. It bridges empathy across imperfection. The technical challenges of filming Flight Risk also amplify the difficulty of Wahlberg's performance. Much of the movie was reportedly shot in real or simulated aircraft environments, where physical constraints made traditional acting gestures impossible. Wahlberg had to rely heavily on facial microexpressions and eye movement to convey emotion, a challenge he meets flawlessly. His ability to project intensity within such limitations showcases a deep understanding of cinematic subtlety. Even under harsh lighting and close-up scrutiny, his authenticity never falters. Michelle Dockery's portrayal of U.S. Marshal Madeline Maddie Reed in Flight Risk 2025 is one of the most striking and layered performances of her career. Known for her refined, composed presence in Downton Abbey and her morally complex roles in Good Behavior and Defending Jacob, Dockery once again proves her remarkable versatility. In Flight Risk, she embodies a woman of law and discipline, thrown into a moral storm that challenges every conviction she holds dear. Her performance is a slow burn, controlled, intelligent, and emotionally precise, evolving from authority to doubt, and from doubt to courage. Under Mel Gibson's direction, Dockery delivers a performance that is at once grounded and transcendent, bringing an emotional core to the film that balances Wahlberg's stoic intensity and Topher Grace's manipulative cunning. At the start of the film, Maddie Reed is the embodiment of lawful order. She's introduced as an officer of the U.S. Marshals Service, assigned to escort a high-profile fugitive across Alaska for trial. From the moment she steps into frame, her posture rigid, her expression stern, her tone clipped but calm, the audience understands that this is a woman who commands respect. Dockery infuses Maddie with quiet confidence. She's not loud or domineering, but her authority radiates from discipline and self-control. The early scenes between her and Daryl Booth, Mark Wahlberg, are defined by professionalism and mutual respect. Their exchanges are short and polite, but there's a tension beneath the surface, a clash between Daryl's instinctive pragmatism and Maddie's adherence to protocol. However, Gibson and Dockery are not content with letting Maddie remain a symbol of law. As the journey progresses, the film begins to peel back her layers, revealing the woman behind the badge. We begin to see flickers of vulnerability, small moments where her composure falters, where her eyes betray fear or doubt. Dockery plays these moments with extraordinary restraint. Rather than breaking down or overreacting, she allows subtle cracks to appear in Maddie's emotional armor. A trembling hand, a deep exhale, a look of hesitation before making a decision. These micro-expressions hint at the internal battle raging within her. Maddie's character depth lies in her conflict between morality and duty. She believes in justice, in the sanctity of law, in the idea that truth can be proven through the system she serves. But that belief is tested when the fugitive, Daniel Kane, Topher Grace, begins revealing details that contradict her mission. He tells her that the people she works for may have fabricated evidence, that the justice she enforces might be compromised. Maddie's first instinct is denial. She's built her entire life on faith in the system. Yet the more she listens, the more she begins to doubt. Dockery captures this erosion of certainty with impeccable nuance. Her facial expressions subtly shift from irritation to unease, from anger to contemplation. It's a masterclass in internal acting, showing a woman trying to reconcile her beliefs with an emerging truth that terrifies her. The dynamic between Maddie and the fugitive forms the psychological backbone of the film. Their dialogue scenes are electric. Two sharp minds probing each other for weakness. Daniel's calm intellect contrasts with Maddie's controlled assertiveness, creating a kind of verbal chess game. Dockery's delivery in these scenes is razor-sharp. She doesn't overplay aggression. Instead, she wields words like weapons, calculated, deliberate, always searching for truth. Yet, as Daniel's revelations start to align with strange inconsistencies in Daryl's behavior, Maddie's confidence wavers. Dockery lets this transformation unfold naturally, allowing the audience to feel every ounce of her confusion. She's torn between her oath to uphold the law and her growing suspicion that the law itself has failed her. Another fascinating aspect of Dockery's performance is her chemistry with Mark Wahlberg. Maddie and Daryl's relationship is one of contrasts. She represents order. He represents chaos. She follows rules, he bends them. Their evolving dynamic becomes a mirror for Maddie's internal journey. Early in the film, she's visibly uncomfortable with Daryl's unpredictability. She corrects him, questions him, keeps her distance. But as the flight turns into a nightmare, as the storm hits, as the fugitive's words begin to echo in her mind, Maddie starts to depend on Daryl. Dockery captures this shift beautifully. Her voice softens, her body language relaxes, her guarded demeanor begins to fade. By the midpoint, their relationship transitions from professional formality to reluctant alliance and, finally, to mutual trust forged in adversity. One of the film's most powerful sequences occurs after the plane crash, when Maddie and Daryl must navigate the frozen wilderness while keeping the fugitive under control. This portion of the film strips away Maddie's authority, her badge, her weapon, her control, leaving only the raw human beneath the uniform. Dockery's portrayal during these scenes is extraordinary. Her fear feels real, but it's not paralyzing. Instead, it drives her forward. She conveys both exhaustion and resilience, embodying a woman rediscovering her own strength outside of institutional power. The way she looks at the fugitive shifts too. She no longer sees him as just a criminal, but as a man, flawed, dangerous, yet disturbingly honest. Dockery's performance thrives on emotional contradictions. Maddie is both protector and prisoner, believer and skeptic, enforcer and victim. In one pivotal scene near the film's climax, Daniel accuses her of being a cog in the machine, suggesting that her loyalty to the law has blinded her to justice. The accusation cuts deep. Dockery's reaction, a long pause, a silent tear that she quickly wipes away, speaks volumes. It's the moment Maddie realizes that her identity has been defined by obedience, not truth. This moment of awakening transforms her from a functionary of the system into an independent moral agent. She begins making choices based not on orders, but on conscience. The script's moral complexity gives Dockery ample room to explore the gray areas of her character. Maddie is not a typical Hollywood law enforcement archetype. She's deeply human. She's not immune to fear, pride, or mistakes. In one memorable scene after a failed attempt to call for help, she lashes out at Daryl in frustration, blaming him for the crash, for the mission, for everything. Her anger feels raw and justified, but beneath it lies guilt. Dockery plays this breakdown with restrained fury, her voice trembling with emotion. Later, when she apologizes, it's quiet and sincere, showing her capacity for humility. These small emotional beats make Maddie Reed a living, breathing person, rather than a caricature. From a technical standpoint, Dockery's body language and vocal control are masterful. As a trained stage actress, she understands how posture and tone convey authority. Early in the film, her spine is straight, her chin slightly raised, her words clipped and formal. But as her belief system begins to fracture, her posture slouches, her voice softens, her tone grows uncertain. These physical changes parallel her psychological unraveling. Even her breathing patterns evolve, controlled and steady in the first act, shallow and irregular by the end. It's an astonishingly detailed transformation that adds realism to her arc. Mel Gibson's direction complements Dockery's approach beautifully. Gibson has always been drawn to stories of faith, guilt, and moral reckoning, and Maddie's character embodies all three. He frames her with light and shadow to symbolize her internal struggle, often showing her face half lit, half obscured. Dockery leans into this symbolism, allowing her expressions to reflect the tension between clarity and confusion. In one haunting shot, as she watches the fugitive through the blizzard, the snow distorts her face in the glass, suggesting that her perception of truth itself has become blurred. It's a small but brilliant cinematic metaphor, brought to life through Dockery's precise emotional control. By the time the story reaches its climax, Maddie Reed has undergone a complete transformation. The woman who began the film as a representative of the law ends it as a seeker of truth. Her final decision, whether to uphold her duty or expose the corruption she's uncovered, becomes the film's ultimate moral test. Dockery handles this moment with breathtaking subtlety. There's no speech, no dramatic outburst, just a long silence, a look of understanding, and the quiet courage to act against everything she once believed in. It's one of the most powerful endings to any character arc in recent thriller cinema, and it's entirely earned through Dockery's nuanced performance. What truly elevates Dockery's portrayal is its emotional realism. She doesn't play Maddie as a strong female character in the superficial Hollywood sense. She plays her as a real woman navigating impossible choices. Her strength isn't loud or physical. It's moral and emotional. She represents integrity tested to its breaking point, and that makes her infinitely relatable. In a genre often dominated by male perspectives, Dockery brings an essential balance. Her performance doesn't just support Wahlberg's, it deepens the entire film's humanity. Critics and audiences alike have praised Dockery's work in Flight Risk as one of the finest of her career. It's a performance that combines restraint with rawness, intellect with emotion. She doesn't steal the spotlight. She earns it, scene by scene, through meticulous emotional truth. Her Maddie Reed stands alongside cinema's great morally conflicted law enforcers. Characters like Clarice Starling in The Silence of the Lambs or Aaron Bell in Destroyer. Yet Dockery makes her entirely her own. Mel Gibson's directorial style in Flight Risk 2025 is a masterclass in tension, morality, and character-driven storytelling, a welcome return to the kind of grounded, emotional filmmaking that first made him one of Hollywood's most respected auteurs. Over the decades, Gibson has proven himself to be more than just a celebrated actor. He's a director with a singular voice, one who blends physical intensity with spiritual depth, brutality with redemption, and chaos with grace. In Flight Risk, he channels all those strengths into a contained, intimate thriller that unfolds like a psychological war in the sky. Rather than relying on grand spectacle or over-the-top set pieces, Gibson builds suspense through claustrophobia, character conflict, and the unbearable weight of moral choice. It's a film that feels both timeless and urgent, echoing the suspense craftsmanship of Alfred Hitchcock and the emotional depth of Clint Eastwood's later works. From the opening frame, Gibson sets the tone with aesthetic precision. The movie begins in silence. No music, no dialogue, just the hum of wind and the faint creak of metal as Darrell Booth, Mark Wahlberg, prepares his small aircraft for takeoff. The camera lingers on his face, on the isolation of the Alaskan landscape stretching endlessly around him. In these early moments, Gibson establishes the two primary forces of the film, nature and guilt. The vast white wilderness becomes a metaphor for the emptiness inside his characters, an endless expanse of silence and buried pain. This is not the glossy action of modern thrillers. This is slow, atmospheric filmmaking that grips you through tone and tension rather than explosions. Gibson's use of minimalism is deliberate and masterful. Flight Risk takes place mostly within the confines of a small plane, a setting that forces the audience to experience the same claustrophobic pressure as the characters. This limited space becomes a crucible, a stage for human truth to burn through facades. Gibson knows that real suspense doesn't come from external threats alone. It comes from watching people trapped together with their secrets. He uses camera placement, pacing, and silence to build unease. The camera often stays too close, invading the character's personal space, creating discomfort not through what we see but through what we feel. Every breath, every glance, every flicker of doubt is amplified in this enclosed environment. One of Gibson's most recognizable directorial trademarks, the fusion of moral struggle and physical endurance, is fully on display here. Whether it's Braveheart, Apocalypto, or Hacksaw Ridge, Gibson's protagonists are always men or women forced to confront pain in pursuit of spiritual truth. Flight Risk continues that tradition, but on a smaller, more psychological scale. Here, the battlefield is not an open field or a war zone. It's the human conscience. Daryl, Maddie, and Daniel are each fighting their own internal wars, and Gibson treats these battles with the same gravity he once gave to medieval rebellion or wartime sacrifice. His direction turns simple actions, flying, talking, surviving, into moral tests. Every choice has weight. Every hesitation carries meaning. Gibson's visual language is equally powerful. Working with cinematographer Caleb Deschanel, he crafts a palette dominated by cold blues, steel grays, and the blinding white of snow, colors that reflect both the external cold and the internal emotional frost of his characters. The Alaskan wilderness is shot not as a postcard of beauty, but as a vast, merciless void. It swallows sound, light, and hope. When the storm descends, the cinematography becomes almost expressionistic. Shaking frames, dimly lit faces, the rhythmic thud of the plane's engine echoing like a heartbeat under stress. Gibson doesn't just show a storm. He makes the audience feel it. Not through CGI, but through atmosphere. His preference for practical effects and grounded realism adds authenticity that modern action directors often sacrifice for spectacle. What separates Gibson's direction from typical thriller filmmaking is his deep understanding of human emotion. He doesn't treat suspense as an external mechanism. He treats it as a psychological condition. The tension and flight risk doesn't come from who will survive, but from who deserves to. Throughout the movie, Gibson plays with audience perception, forcing us to question every character's morality. At times, we sympathize with Daryl's grief. At others, we suspect him of deception. We admire Maddie's integrity but grow frustrated with her rigidity. We're intrigued by Daniel's intelligence but repulsed by his manipulation. Gibson keeps these moral boundaries deliberately blurred, turning the film into an exercise in empathy and doubt. Gibson's narrative pacing also reflects his maturity as a filmmaker. Flight risk unfolds with patience, each revelation carefully timed, each emotional beat earned. The first act builds quiet intrigue. The second act traps the characters in conflict, and the final act delivers both psychological catharsis and physical survival. It's structured like a symphony, where every note matters and silence carries as much power as sound. When action finally erupts, whether in the crash sequence or the final confrontation, it feels deserved, not gratuitous. Gibson understands that violence is most effective when it serves emotion, not the other way around. His use of sound design during these moments, the muffled roar of engines, the crunch of snow, the heavy breathing of fear, creates immersion that feels tactile and real. The crash sequence, in particular, showcases Gibson's technical prowess and thematic depth. Rather than turning it into a spectacle of destruction, he frames it as an existential event. The camera stays close to Daryl's face, cutting between the trembling dials, Maddie's tense grip and Daniel's eerie calm. There's no bombastic score, just the escalating hum of the engine and the creaking of metal as the plane descends. The crash becomes a metaphor for each character's moral descent, the moment where control collapses and truth begins to surface. It's a stunning example of Gibson's ability to merge physical danger with psychological revelation. Gibson also uses religious and moral symbolism throughout the film, a recurring hallmark of his work. The airplane, suspended between earth and sky, becomes a metaphorical purgatory. Its passengers are souls trapped between sin and salvation, between the lies they've told and the truths they fear. The endless white landscape below them resembles both a heaven of purity and a hell of isolation. Gibson subtly weaves these visual symbols into the narrative, never preaching but always provoking reflection. Just as he did in Hacksaw Ridge or The Passion of the Christ, he explores the spiritual cost of survival, the idea that redemption must be earned through suffering. One of Gibson's greatest achievements here is his direction of actors. He draws out extraordinary performances from Wahlberg, Dockery, and Grace, guiding each into emotional territory that feels raw and real. Gibson doesn't over-direct. He trusts his actors to find truth in stillness. The result is chemistry that feels organic, dialogue that feels spontaneous. He also understands when to hold the camera, when to let a silence stretch until it becomes almost unbearable. That patience with performance is what separates him from many modern directors who rush to fill every moment with noise. In Gibson's hands, a single glance or pause can carry more weight than an explosion. There's also a distinct philosophical undercurrent in Gibson's storytelling here. Flight risk isn't just about physical survival. It's about moral reckoning. Each character represents a different philosophy of truth. Daryl believes redemption can be earned through action. Maddie believes justice comes through order. Daniel believes truth is power, even if it destroys. Gibson weaves these ideologies into conflict until they collide in the film's finale, where every character must confront not just the storm outside, but the one within. In this sense, Flight Risk recalls Gibson's earlier works, stories of flawed people seeking transcendence through pain. Gibson's return to the director's chair after several years feels significant in itself. The industry has changed dramatically since his last projects, but Flight Risk proves that his command of narrative and emotion remains unparalleled. In an era of CGI-laden blockbusters, his focus on practical realism, moral tension, and old-fashioned craftsmanship feels almost radical. He isn't chasing trends. He's refining timeless storytelling principles. Suspense built on empathy, spectacle grounded in character, emotion elevated by restraint. The film's modest budget compared to modern action thrillers actually enhances its intensity, reminding audiences that great cinema doesn't require excess, it requires truth. Technically, Gibson's collaboration with composer Rupert Gregson-Williams deserves mention. The score is minimalist, sparse piano, haunting strings, and ambient tones that emphasize loneliness rather than excitement. Gibson knows when to let silence dominate, and when to let music breathe emotion into a scene. The absence of sound often creates more suspense than any orchestral swell could. It's this balance between control and chaos that defines his directorial style. Thematically, Flight Risk aligns perfectly with Gibson's long-standing obsession with redemption. Every one of his films, and from Braveheart to Apocalypto to Hacksaw Ridge, explores the human capacity to endure suffering and find meaning in it. Here he translates that grand spiritual theme into a small personal story. Daryl's flight becomes a journey through grief. Maddie's mission becomes a test of faith, and Daniel's escape becomes a confrontation with guilt. Flight Risk 2025 distinguishes itself from the majority of modern action thrillers through its meticulous balance of high-stakes action and psychological tension, particularly within the tight, confined, and unpredictable environment of an aircraft in the Alaskan wilderness. Unlike traditional action films that rely heavily on bombastic explosions, extended gunfights, or CGI spectacle, Flight Risk generates its intensity through relentless pressure, moral dilemmas, and survival-focused sequences, creating a palpable sense of immediacy and danger that keeps viewers on edge from the very first scene. Mel Gibson's directorial restraint, paired with Caleb Deschanel's visceral cinematography, ensures that every action sequence not only thrills the audience, but also advances character development and narrative stakes. From the opening scenes, the film establishes tension through subtle, layered action. The very act of flying in the small, icy Alaskan airspace is itself a source of suspense. Daryl Booth, Mark Wahlberg, is a pilot operating under extreme environmental conditions. Limited visibility, treacherous terrain, and the constant threat of mechanical failure. Gibson and Deschanel emphasize these dangers with precise framing. Close-ups on trembling hands gripping controls, tight shots of fluctuating instrument panels, and shots of snow-laden peaks looming dangerously close. Every moment of flight becomes a potential crisis, and the audience feels the pilot's fear, anticipation, and responsibility in real time. In this way, ordinary aviation maneuvers are elevated into edge-of-your-seat sequences, making the mundane terrifying. The fugitive element, embodied by Daniel Cain, Topher Grace, introduces a human threat that amplifies the thriller dimension. Cain's presence within the plane creates an omnipresent tension. The audience never knows what he might do next. Unlike conventional villains, Cain doesn't rely on overt violence. Instead, his intelligence, unpredictability, and manipulative nature make him far more dangerous. He exploits both the physical confines of the aircraft and the psychological vulnerabilities of the crew. Every conversation, glance, or calculated action from Cain feels loaded with threat. Gibson masterfully choreographs these interactions, allowing suspense to grow organically from character dynamics rather than relying on gratuitous action set pieces. One of the film's most striking achievements is its use of claustrophobia as a vehicle for action and suspense. The airplane's small interior becomes a pressure cooker, every movement, every sound amplified by proximity. The camera captures the narrow aisles, the shaking seats, and the close-quartered standoffs in ways that make viewers acutely aware of the character's limited mobility. When confrontations occur, such as Kane's attempts to manipulate Daryl or Maddie, the audience feels both physical and psychological entrapment. Gibson understands that tension is strongest when the characters have no easy escape, and he crafts sequences where suspense is sustained through confined choreography, silent threats, and micro-gestures rather than continuous explosions. The plane crash sequence exemplifies the film's synthesis of action and thriller elements. Unlike the overproduced crash scenes of typical blockbusters, Gibson stages this sequence with meticulous realism and escalating tension. The crash begins gradually. Turbulence increases, alarms sound, instruments falter, creating a slow build of fear. As the plane loses altitude, the cinematography alternates between disorienting close-ups and wide shots of the vast white wilderness, visually communicating the stakes and scale of the disaster. The actors' performances, particularly Wahlberg's and Dockery's, ground the chaos emotionally. Each jolt, each swerve of the plane is felt not just visually but viscerally, immersing the audience in the physicality of the crisis. The aftermath of the crash intensifies the thriller component. Survival now depends not only on skill, but on moral choices, trust and ingenuity. Post-crash sequences shift the film's action from aviation-based to survivalist intensity, blending elements of thriller, adventure, and psychological drama. Traversing snowbound landscapes, navigating treacherous ice, and managing limited resources force the characters to act under extreme duress. Every step carries the risk of injury, exposure, or confrontation with Kane. Gibson stages these moments with realism and suspense, often emphasizing slow, deliberate pacing interspersed with bursts of sudden danger. The cold becomes an antagonist in its own right. Frostbite, hypothermia, and disorientation compound the human threats, raising the stakes and maintaining tension without relying on contrived peril. The cat-and-mouse dynamic between Kane and the other characters further enhances the thriller aspect. Kane's intelligence and unpredictability drive much of the suspense, as he manipulates situations to his advantage. His ability to exploit environmental hazards, anticipate decisions, and psychologically pressure Daryl and Maddie creates a sense of constant uncertainty. Gibson and Grace choreograph these sequences with precision, showing Kane's movements through tight framing, camera angles that suggest dominance or concealment, and timing that keeps the audience guessing. Even when physical violence is minimal, the suspense is palpable because of Kane's intellectual threat, proving that cerebral tension can be as gripping as kinetic action. The film also employs practical effects over CGI to heighten realism. Snowstorms, high winds, and in-plane turbulence are all created through physical means rather than digital manipulation, creating tangible stakes. The snow gusts, the rocking of the aircraft, the cracking of ice underfoot, each is experienced through the lens, making danger immediate. This commitment to authenticity allows viewers to engage fully with the action sequences, as every environmental obstacle feels tangible and unpredictable. The tactile quality of Gibson's action set pieces distinguishes Flight Risk from other thrillers reliant on visual effects, providing a grounded, immersive experience. Another hallmark of the film's thriller design is its integration of character psychology into action sequences. Every movement carries narrative weight. When Daryl makes a split-second decision to adjust the plane's trajectory, or when Maddie reacts to Kane's provocation, the tension arises not from spectacle alone, but from moral and emotional stakes. The action sequences function as tests of judgment and integrity. Survival depends as much on mental acuity as physical skill. This layering of psychological complexity onto traditional action elevates the film beyond conventional thriller fare. The sound design plays a crucial role in the film's intensity. From the hum of the aircraft's engine to the whistling wind through the fuselage, every sound amplifies suspense. Silence is employed strategically, punctuating moments of decision, hesitation, and revelation. This interplay of sound and silence heightens the thriller experience, allowing viewers to anticipate danger and feel the characters' heightened senses. Even during fast-paced sequences, the film balances noise and quiet to maintain a sense of realism and tension. Gibson also makes extensive use of perspective and camera angles to amplify thrill. Tight close-ups of eyes, hands, or instrument panels convey anxiety and focus, while wider shots reveal environmental hazards and spatial relationships. High-angle shots emphasize vulnerability, while low angles suggest dominance or threat. These techniques not only make the action visually compelling, but also communicate psychological states, turning every scene into a layered thriller moment. The interpersonal conflicts within the plane further fuel the action and suspense. Maddie and Daryl must navigate Kane's manipulations while managing their own mistrust and guilt. These confrontations create tension as sharp as any physical threat. Gibson stages dialogue-driven suspense with precision, using silence, pacing, and subtle gestures to create a sense of unease. The audience feels every glance, every pause, every withheld word, understanding that verbal choices can have life or death consequences. In Flight Risk, words can be as lethal as a weapon, reinforcing the psychological intensity of the thriller elements. The storm sequences combine environmental and action-driven suspense seamlessly. The plane battling turbulent skies, the unpredictability of snow and ice, and the threat of exposure once grounded, transform natural phenomena into cinematic antagonists. Gibson's control over pacing ensures that these sequences are both visually stunning and narratively compelling. The audience experiences vertigo, isolation, and fear, fully inhabiting the survival scenario alongside the characters. Every gust of wind and drift of snow contributes to tension, turning the Alaskan wilderness into a dynamic battlefield. Gibson also skillfully manipulates temporal tension. Many sequences unfold in real time or with minimal editing, allowing suspense to build gradually. This slow-burn approach contrasts with the rapid cuts of most modern action films, resulting in heightened realism and emotional engagement. The audience experiences anticipation, dread, and relief alongside the characters, creating a visceral connection to the narrative. Even minor actions like reaching for a lever or adjusting a harness carry amplified suspense. The film's moral stakes intersect with action, raising the intensity further. Every decision, from following protocol to bending rules, carries both physical and ethical consequences. Daryl's choices during flight maneuvers or survival efforts are not neutral. They affect Maddie, Kane, and even the outcome of justice. The cinematography and setting of Flight Risk 2025 are integral to its storytelling power, shaping the film's tone, emotion, and sense of danger from the very first frame. Shot primarily in Alaska, the movie's visual design immerses viewers in a world that is both breathtakingly beautiful and profoundly hostile, a landscape that mirrors the moral and psychological turbulence of its characters. Mel Gibson, working alongside acclaimed cinematographer Caleb Deschanel, crafts a film where every shot is deliberate, every shadow symbolic, and every wide expanse of snow a reflection of inner emptiness. The camera doesn't just observe the story, it becomes a participant in it, pulling the audience into the cold heart of a wilderness that tests the limits of human endurance and morality. The choice of Alaska as the backdrop for Flight Risk is a stroke of directorial genius. The Alaskan wilderness, with its vast stretches of snow, icy mountains, and unpredictable weather, functions as a living, breathing character, a silent antagonist as menacing as any human threat. In Gibson's vision, nature is not merely a setting but a force of judgment. It strips away pretense, revealing the raw truth of who people are when civilization falls away. The endless white horizon becomes a metaphor for moral isolation, a place where lies, guilt, and redemption can no longer hide. Deschanel captures this terrain with a painter's eye and a soldier's discipline, blending natural light and environmental chaos into a visual narrative that feels both authentic and poetic. From the very beginning, the cinematography establishes an atmosphere of tension through contrast. The opening aerial shots, long sweeping views of snowfields beneath a cold, pale sun, convey both serenity and danger. The vastness feels majestic yet suffocating. When the camera cuts to the interior of the small airplane, the contrast is stark. Inside, everything is confined. Narrow aisles, dim lighting, close-up shots of tense faces. This visual juxtaposition between the limitless expanse outside and the claustrophobic interior creates an immediate sense of pressure. The audience feels trapped, caught between freedom and death, mirroring the character's own predicament. Deschanel, known for his work on The Passion of the Christ, The Right Stuff, and The Lion King, brings his mastery of natural light to the film. The lighting throughout Flight Risk is minimalistic yet emotionally charged. In daylight scenes, the whiteness of the snow becomes overwhelming, nearly blinding. This harsh brightness reflects the film's moral clarity, the truth that can't be hidden. At night, the light shifts to icy blues and muted grays, creating a feeling of quiet dread. The dim glow of instrument panels, the reflection of moonlight on snow, and the subtle flicker of lightning from distant storms give the visuals a haunting, almost spiritual quality. Gibson and Deschanel understand that true fear often lies in what we can't quite see or in the half-lit spaces where uncertainty thrives. One of the most remarkable aspects of Flight Risk's cinematography is its use of perspective. The film constantly plays with the viewer's sense of orientation, using aerial shots to evoke scale and close-ups to intensify emotion. When the plane soars over mountains, the camera captures sweeping panoramas that make human beings look insignificant, mere specks in the face of nature's immensity. But once inside the plane, the frame tightens drastically, focusing on eyes, hands, and trembling lips. This alternating rhythm between vastness and confinement keeps the audience psychologically off balance. It's as if the film itself is breathing, expanding and contracting with the tension of the story. In key moments, the cinematography becomes subjective, reflecting the character's mental states rather than objective reality. When Daryl Booth, Mark Wahlberg, begins to unravel under the pressure of his secret, the camera grows restless. Handheld movements replace steady tracking, and the focus subtly shifts in and out, mimicking his wavering control. During the storm sequence, the lens fogs with condensation and snowflakes streak across the frame, making it hard to see, exactly as the characters experience it. This immersive approach draws viewers into the chaos, making them feel the cold, the disorientation, and the sheer terror of flying blind. It's not just an action scene, it's an emotional experience rendered visually. The Alaskan wilderness provides Gibson and Deschanel with a natural palette of extremes. They use it to symbolize both purity and peril. The pristine snowfields suggest innocence and redemption, while the frozen rivers and jagged peaks represent danger and death. There's a constant interplay between beauty and hostility. One moment, the landscape looks ethereal and inviting. The next, it turns merciless and indifferent. This duality mirrors the characters themselves, people capable of both compassion and cruelty, redemption and ruin. The environment becomes a mirror of the human soul, reflecting its contradictions in every icy gust and shadowed ridge. Perhaps the most visually striking sequence in Flight Risk is the plane crash. Unlike typical Hollywood crash scenes filled with CGI explosions, Gibson and Deschanel choose realism. The camera stays tight on the cockpit, capturing the panic in the actors' faces, the violent shaking of controls, the distortion of sound as metal groans and glass shatters. Then as the plane hits the snow, the frame cuts to a wide shot, the tiny wreck swallowed by a vast, silent white landscape. The stillness that follows is more shocking than the crash itself. Deschanel uses silence and negative space to emphasize isolation. In that moment, the wilderness becomes the true judge, indifferent, unmoved, eternal. Color also plays a symbolic role throughout the film. The dominant whites, grays, and blues establish a tone of moral ambiguity and emotional coldness. However, Gibson introduces subtle splashes of warmer tones, the brown of Daryl's jacket, the red of a flare, the orange glow of a fading sunset, as visual metaphors for fleeting humanity in a frozen world. Each warm color feels like a heartbeat struggling against the cold. These touches are never random. They punctuate emotional turning points, signaling hope, conflict, or confession. The cinematography also leverages sound and silence as visual tools. While technically not part of visual design, Deschanel and Gibson synchronize imagery with sound in a way that deepens impact. The eerie quiet of the wilderness, broken only by wind or the distant cry of a bird, amplifies every visual detail. The slow drift of falling snow feels heavier, the shadow of a mountain more ominous. Silence becomes a visual presence, a kind of cinematic negative space that enhances every frame's weight. In scenes where the characters trek across snow after the crash, the camera work becomes gritty and intimate. Handheld shots follow them through blizzards, the lens streaked with frost, visibility reduced to a few feet. These moments highlight vulnerability, three people dwarfed by an indifferent world. The desaturated color grading gives everything a dreamlike, almost hallucinatory quality, as if reality itself is fading with their strength. Every crunch of snow underfoot, every exhale visible in the air, every glance at the endless horizon reinforces the central theme. Survival is both physical and moral. Another key strength lies in Gibson's understanding of symbolic framing. He and Deschanel frequently use visual composition to reflect character dynamics. For instance, early in the film, Daryl is often shown in profile or partially shadowed, visually suggesting his hidden motives. Maddie, Michelle Dockery, is framed in full light, representing truth and moral clarity. Daniel, Topher Grace, on the other hand, is often framed behind glass or reflective surfaces, a visual cue for deception and manipulation. As the story progresses and power dynamics shift, so do the framing choices. By the climax, Daryl steps fully into the light, while Daniel's face disappears into shadow. This evolution in visual storytelling parallels their moral arcs, reinforcing narrative through imagery. The Alaskan weather itself becomes a cinematic device, unpredictable, violent, and transformative. Gibson uses snowstorms as both literal and metaphorical obstacles. When the storm intensifies, the screen fills with white. Visibility disappears and the boundaries between sky and earth vanish. It's as if the world itself is erasing them. This visual chaos mirrors the character's moral confusion. When the storm finally clears, the return of clarity and sunlight feels almost sacred, a visual resurrection. The camera's exposure brightens, the contrast softens, and for a brief moment, peace returns. Deschanel's cinematography also captures the spiritual subtext of the story. The interplay of light and shadow suggests divine judgment and forgiveness. The sun breaking through clouds after the storm resembles a benediction. The horizon, ever distant and unreachable, becomes a symbol of salvation, something always visible yet impossible to touch. Gibson and Deschanel don't spell out these meanings. They let the images speak. That's what makes the cinematography so powerful. It engages both the intellect and the senses, inviting viewers to interpret meaning rather than dictating it. Technically, Flight Risk is an achievement in aerial cinematography. The camera rigs mounted on the plane capture breathtaking vistas while maintaining realism. Gibson avoids exaggerated drone shots. Instead, he opts for dynamic camera movement that mirrors the rhythm of flight. Smooth ascents, sudden drops, the sway of turbulence. These choices give the audience a visceral sense of motion and vulnerability. Topher Grace's portrayal of Daniel Kane in Flight Risk 2025 is a masterclass in understated menace and psychological complexity, redefining the archetype of the modern thriller antagonist. Known primarily for his roles in that '70s show BlacKkKlansman and Spider-Man 3, Grace has spent much of his career oscillating between comedic charm and dramatic gravitas. In Flight Risk, he taps fully into the latter, delivering a performance that is as intellectually threatening as it is emotionally chilling. Unlike conventional villains who rely on physical aggression or exaggerated intimidation, Kane is terrifying because of his intelligence, unpredictability, and moral ambiguity. Grace crafts a character who operates in shades of gray, forcing both the protagonist and the audience to constantly question his motives, intentions, and ultimate morality. From his first appearance, Kane establishes control through presence rather than action. Grace's body language is meticulously controlled, a slight lean, a measured pace, a casual tilt of the head, signaling dominance in subtle ways. He speaks with calm authority, never raising his voice unnecessarily, yet every word carries weight. This is not the loud, bombastic villain of standard thrillers. Kane's power lies in manipulation, foresight, and the ability to exploit the fears and weaknesses of those around him. Grace's nuanced facial expressions, particularly his subtle smirks and fleeting glances, suggest that Kane is always several steps ahead, creating a pervasive sense of unease. Kane's interactions with Daryl Booth, Mark Wahlberg, are central to the film's tension. Early in the movie, Kane presents himself as cooperative, even personable, allowing Daryl to underestimate him. Grace balances charm with danger, making Kane simultaneously approachable and threatening. The dynamic evolves as the flight progresses. Kane tests Daryl's patience, observes his reactions, and subtly provokes doubt about Maddie Reed's, Michelle Dockery, loyalty. Each conversation is a psychological duel, with Grace's delivery perfectly calibrated to maintain ambiguity. The audience never fully knows if Kane is a repentant man caught in circumstance or a manipulative mastermind plotting every move. This uncertainty drives suspense and anchors much of the film's thriller elements. Grace's control over tone and pacing is particularly notable. He rarely rushes, allowing tension to build in small increments. In moments of confrontation, he often pauses, letting silence carry threat. These pauses are deliberate, creating anticipation and forcing both characters and viewers to fill the gaps with anxiety. For instance, in a pivotal mid-flight scene, Kane quietly questions Maddie's commitment to protocol, his voice calm, measured, and eerily persuasive. Grace's subtle shifts in emphasis, a slight pause, a deliberate enunciation, a softening of tone, make the words feel like weapons. The audience feels the psychological pressure as keenly as the characters do. Kane is not merely a manipulator of others. He is a master of observation, which Grace conveys brilliantly through micro-expressions and body language. Every glance, twitch, and smirk is loaded with subtext. In the plane's confined environment, Kane's ability to read others' fears and insecurities becomes a constant threat. Grace communicates this mastery without overtly speaking about it. The camera often lingers on his reactions to small details, a nervous glance, a hesitation, a sigh, suggesting he sees more than anyone else realizes. This subtlety adds layers to the character, making him unpredictable and increasing narrative tension. Grace also captures Kane's intellectual arrogance convincingly. He exudes the quiet confidence of someone who knows he can manipulate events to his advantage. This arrogance is never overplayed. It is understated, clinical, and chillingly realistic. When Kane offers insights into Daryl and Maddie's vulnerabilities, Grace delivers the lines with a calm precision that amplifies threat without spectacle. The intelligence-based menace contrasts with the physical threats posed by environmental hazards, creating a dual tension where the audience fears both the wilderness and Kane's strategic mind. A key aspect of Grace's performance is his ability to blend charm and menace, making Kane simultaneously likable and dangerous. There are moments when Kane's humor, wit, or vulnerability surfaces, causing viewers to question their judgment. Grace carefully modulates these moments, never letting them dilute Kane's threat. Instead, the charm functions as a tool of deception. Kane's ability to disarm others emotionally mirrors his skill in controlling events. This duality makes the character compelling and unpredictable, elevating the stakes for every interaction. Kane's relationship with Maddie Reed, Michelle Dockery, further deepens his complexity. Early in the film, he respects her adherence to law and order, recognizing both a challenge and an opportunity. Grace plays this dynamic with subtle psychological nuance. Kane probes Maddie's convictions, plants seeds of doubt, and tests her loyalty, all while maintaining a veneer of politeness. Each exchange is a masterclass in cat-and-mouse psychology, with Grace adjusting tone, posture, and facial expression to reflect both threat and admiration. The tension in these scenes is not derived from violence but from intellect and moral persuasion, demonstrating Grace's range as an actor and the sophistication of the film's thriller writing. The plane crash marks a turning point in Kane's arc, highlighting Grace's versatility. Confronted with genuine danger, he maintains a calm exterior, but subtle cues, a quick glance at the impending storm, a tightening of the jaw, a brief hesitation in movement, reveal internal calculations and fear. Kane's reactions during the crash sequence show him as adaptable and resourceful, further reinforcing his role as a credible threat. Grace conveys the delicate balance between self-preservation and manipulation, ensuring Kane remains both intelligent and vulnerable, humanizing him without diminishing his danger. Post-crash, the psychological tension escalates and Grace's performance becomes even more layered. Stranded in the Alaskan wilderness, Kane exploits environmental hazards and human weaknesses alike. His calm analytical mind contrasts with the growing desperation of Daryl and Maddie, highlighting his ability to maintain composure under extreme pressure. Grace uses this juxtaposition to reinforce Kane's intellectual dominance, emphasizing that his threat is not merely physical but strategic and moral. The audience experiences continuous suspense as they anticipate whether Kane will exploit his advantage or falter under environmental and emotional strain. Grace's approach to villainous subtlety stands out in a genre often dominated by overt antagonists. Kane's malevolence is never shouted or exaggerated. It is embedded in intention, observation, and manipulation. Grace communicates threat through timing, voice modulation, and minimal gestures, demonstrating that psychological control can be far more terrifying than brute force. In doing so, he elevates flight risk beyond conventional thriller tropes, showing that a cerebral antagonist can be equally compelling, if not more, than action-driven threats. The moral ambiguity of Kane's character also enhances suspense. At times he appears repentant or vulnerable. At others he seems calculating and ruthless. Grace navigates this duality expertly, ensuring that viewers remain uncertain of Kane's ultimate goals until the climactic sequences. This ambiguity is central to the film's tension. The audience cannot rely on standard narrative cues to predict Kane's behavior, making every decision, dialogue, and movement unpredictable. The thriller is as much psychological as it is action-based, and Grace's performance anchors that complexity. Moreover, Grace's physical acting is subtle yet highly effective. His micro-movements, including small hand gestures, shifts in posture, and controlled eye contact, communicate dominance and strategy. Even in moments of inaction, Kane exerts influence. A raised eyebrow, a calculated pause, a deliberate glance can shift the balance of power in a scene. These understated physical cues make Kane a constant presence, maintaining suspense even when he is not actively engaged in the scene's main action. The dynamic with Daryl evolves over the course of the film, providing some of the most gripping thriller sequences. Kane continuously tests Daryl's limits, forcing moral and practical choices that push him toward exhaustion and desperation. Grace's timing and delivery make these interactions feel authentic. The psychological pressure is visible in Daryl's growing tension, reflecting Kane's manipulative effectiveness. Grace never overplays dominance. Instead, he creates a slow, creeping tension that builds steadily, mirroring the pacing of the broader narrative. As the story moves toward its climax, Kane's intensity reaches its peak. Trapped in the wilderness with environmental hazards and interpersonal conflict converging, Grace conveys both desperation and cunning. Every decision he makes is calculated, every action deliberate, and every interaction weighted with the potential for danger. His portrayal ensures that the audience remains engaged and apprehensive until the very end. Kane is a villain whose intelligence, patience, and adaptability make him as formidable as any physical threat in cinema. Finally, Topher Grace's performance ensures that Kane is unforgettable. He combines subtle charm, calculated menace, intellectual prowess, and moral ambiguity to create a fully realized antagonist. Kane is not merely a foil for Daryl or Maddie. He is a catalyst for tension, ethical questioning, and narrative suspense.